Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Uh, I'm coming to you today is April 10th, 2021. But in Palestinian history, the month of April and also month of May, June, especially in relations to 1948 period, the period that is known as the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe. It's a period that is filled with trauma, for difficulties for the Palestinians, and witnessing the Nakba that resulted in the forceful transfer, ethnic cleansing, destruction of over 570 villages, towns, emptying whole towns of its own populations. And in particular, April 9th, which was yesterday, but also would be a continuation to April 10th, is the commemoration of the Palestinian or the commemoration of the massacre at Deir Yassin. Deir Yassin is a small village just outside of Jerusalem in 1948, and all indication from the records, both in terms of Palestinian records, early Israeli records, as well as the British and others, point that the village was actually peaceful, that it actually set itself to be in a neutral position, not assisting or aiding or participating in the Palestinian resistance, being surrounded by close to 100,000, possibly more, Jewish populations in all of the surroundings. And they had amicable relations, peaceful relations with their surroundings. So the massacre itself is unique in relations to the particular history in 1948. But more importantly, that when we think of the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe, what we need to really point our finger on is on the deliberate nature, the systematic, the pre-planned events that the massacre was part, if anything, was one large part of the attempt to expel the Palestinians from their homeland and, in essence, establish or create a state on the remnants and on top of the lands, the properties that have been stolen from the Palestinians in 1948. In terms of its location, we do have the map that points to where Deir Yassin is at. And we could see it right here in the middle of the map, right to my left. And in essence, it's a close proximity, and it's in the environs of Jerusalem. And it's not surprising that in the aftermath of the massacre in 1948, that the survivals to begin with were collected, taken into trucks to be paraded in the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, and then brought back and shot behind the quarry right in Deir Yassin. So that shows the proximity of the town or the small village to Jerusalem to be able to do so. Now, some of the testimonies from the individuals who witnessed and survived, Muhammad said, quote, "I saw how Hilwa Zaidan was killed, along with her husband, her son, her brother, and Humayis. Helwa Zaidan went out to collect the body of her husband. They shot her and she fell over his body. I saw Hayat Bilbisi, a nurse from Jerusalem, who was serving in the village, as she was shot before the door of Musa Hassan's house. The daughter of Abu al-Abd was shot dead as she held her baby niece. The baby was shot too. Whoever tried to run away was shot dead, said Muhammad, who was 15 when the events of Deir Yassin took place. Yassini tells of horrific details also of the Deir Yassin Massacre. She said, quote, "Everything seemed strange. There was blood everywhere. A dead woman holding her baby reminded me of my mother. So I dashed to our house. I found my mother hiding in fear in the basement. And when she saw me, she cried and started screaming. She told me to go to my uncle's house next door through a hole in the wall to make sure that the rest of the family was still alive. When I peered through the hole, I saw her. I could see traces of blood all over. I could see traces of blood all over the place. All that I could see was blood. I knew that they had all been massacred. I had lost my uncles, Yusuf and Muhammad Hamida." End of quote. Now we also have a report from the Israeli intelligence unit or commander of the time, put together on April 12, 1948. Said, quote, "The occupation of the village was carried out with great cruelty. Whole families, women, old people, children were killed, and there were piles of dead in various places. Some of the prisoners moved to places of incarceration, including women and children were murdered viciously by their captors." In a report the following day, Levy added, Leahy, the Stern Gang led by Yitzhak Shamir, who became later the prime minister, members still of the barbaric behavior of the Ergen Gang, which is led by Menachem Begin, toward the prisoners and the dead. They also relate that the Ergen men raped a number of Palestinian Arab girls and murdered them afterward. And what we don't know if this is true. The Shia operative who visited Deir Yassin hours after the massacre, Mordechai Gushen, reported on April 10, 1948. There, the Ergen commander says that the order was to capture the adult males and to send the women and children to Mudza. In the afternoon of April 9, the order was changed and became kill all prisoners. The adult males were taken to town in trucks and paraded in the city, then taken back to the village site and killed with rifle and machine gun fire. Before they were put on the trucks, the Ergen and Leahy men searched the women, men and children and took from them all the jewelry and stole their money. The behavior toward them was especially barbaric, including kicks, shoves with rifle butts, spitting and cursing. People from the western Jerusalem neighborhood of Yevat Shaul took part in the torture. This is in reference to the Palestinians from Deir Yassin. We also have a report actually that comes from the Palestinian historian Arif al-Arif in volume 1, where he actually details in a number of pages the circumstances of what took place and the massacre that is recorded in Palestinian sources. So again, we have the sources from the eyewitnesses, we have the sources from the Israeli intelligence report on April 12th, and we have also the Palestinian historian Arif al-Arif but also those who are familiar with other Palestinian historians, in particular Walid al-Khalidi, have written on this period, and in the most recent also the work of my dear friend Noor Masalha is excellent in documenting and still engaging with the period of 1948, the massacres and expulsion of the Palestinians. So when we think about the Deir Yassin massacre and what it brought about, we have to think that Palestinian society at the time, that the massacre, Deir Yassin massacre, was a critical part of the Israeli strategy to empty the areas that was designated, or the region that was designated to be part of the state of Israel, to empty it of its Palestinian population. And thus this strategic use of violence as an instrument to bring about the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Now we know that the Palestinian society, we know where the Palestinians were living, what type of society. Actually the British, the Anglo-American Committee of Inquiry prepared a complete survey of Palestine. This was prepared in December 1945 and January 1946, and it's close to 1,200 pages of documentation that every area, every region of the country, the population. So we know the type of population and the landscape of Palestine during that period. So when the United Nations passed Resolution 181, it became part of the strategy to empty the area that was designated to be a Jewish state from its Palestinian population. And this was part of a systematic program that you could say is almost constitutive of Zionist ideas and Zionist planning early on. What we are thinking, or what we are in here pointing our fingers to, is that when you are dealing with settler colonialism, as the Zionist project was and continue to be, it involves around either genocide of the indigenous population or transfer, or some circumstances is a combination of both. If we think about the United States having experienced both genocide of the native population and expulsion, not expulsion, but transfer of the indigenous populations into reservation. I want to read a little bit. This is my book, Palestine, It's Something Colonial, specifically on what Benny Morris, who's before that, again, just to point to one of the items from Herzl. Herzl, on his diary on June 12, 1895, he reads, "When we occupy the land, we shall bring immediate benefits to the state that receives us. We should try to spirit the penniless Arab population across the borders by procuring employment for it in the transit countries, while denying any employment for it in our own country," meaning in the Zionist states. "The property owner will come over to our side. Both the process of expropriation and the removal of the poor must be carried out discreetly and circumspectly." So again, the idea of expelling the Palestinians laid out early on in Herzl's own ideas, and it's been carried out. It's been one of those consistent paradigmatic element of Zionism, which is the need to empty Palestine. So settler colonialism wants to lay claim to the land, but it's emptied of its population. And if we read a little bit more in relations to massacres, in relations to Deir Yassin, who is an Israeli history researcher, he said, who actually worked in the Israeli army archives, he said, quote, at least 20 large massacres of Arabs took place during the War of Independence, which is 1948. He defined as over 50 murdered in each massacre, at about 100 small massacres defined as of individuals or small groups. Yassin further concludes, these massacres had a profound effect on the fleeing of Arabs from the country. Yassin points out that for many Israelis it was easy to cling to the safe claim that the Arabs left because that was what their leaders ordered them. He said, that is a total lie. So again, massacres was an instrument that was deployed by the newly formed Israeli state, even before its emergence into statehood. And during the critical period, they planned Dalit, which is something that was deployed, approved by Ben Gurion to do so. In its Haki view, he said, the fundamental cause for the flight of the Arabs was their fear of Israeli violence. And that fear had a basis in reality. He continues to say, from almost every report which appears in the Army's archive, meaning Israeli army archives, from almost every report which appears in the Army's archives about the occupation of Arab villages during the May-July 1948, the height of confrontation with the Arab villagers, there comes the smell of a massacre. Let me repeat. There comes the smell of a massacre. Yuri Melstein, who's another prominent Israeli historian, again, these are Zionist historians. They're not what you call, you put them as liberal, Arab-loving, and so on, whatever the current term to dismiss these views. Yuri Melstein said, if Ishaqi claims there were murders in every village, then I say that up to the inception of Israel, every event of fighting ended in a massacre of Arabs. Every event of fighting ended in a massacre of Arabs. There were massacres of Arabs in all of Israel wars, but I have no doubt that the War of Independence was the dirtiest. So again, this comes to us from Yuri Melstein. And another interview given to the Israeli newspaper Haaretz on January 9th, 2004, Benny Morris, who's again, not to be confused to be anti-Zionist or anyone that would actually contemplate to be a pro-Palestinian, by no means. He said in the interview, but also you could reference some of his writings in his book. He says, quote, to my surprise, there were also many cases of rape. In the months of April-May 1948, units of the Haganah, the pre-state defense force that was the precursor to the IDF, were given operational orders that stated explicitly they were to uproot the villagers, expel them, and destroy the villages themselves. Again, there's explicit orders that they uproot the villagers, expel them, and destroy the villages themselves. So Israel committed acts of genocide against the Palestinians, expelled them from their villages, as well as destroyed the villages themselves. He said about a dozen in Accra, false soldiers raped a girl and murdered her father. In Jaffa, soldiers of the Kiryati Brigade raped one girl and tried to rape several more. At Hunain, which is in the Galilee, 2 girls were raped and then murdered. There were 1 or 2 cases of rape in Tanitra, south of Haifa. There was one case of rape at Qulla in the center of the country. At the village of Abu Shushe near Kibbutz Gezer, there were 4 female prisoners, one of whom was raped a number of times. And there were other cases. Usually more than one soldier was involved in such cases. That's my addition in such cases. Usually there were 1 or 2 Palestinian girls. In a large proportion of the cases, the event ended with murder. Because neither the victims nor the rapist liked to report these events, right? So he's actually saying that because the girls were raped, and this might have been bringing shame, or here using what you call a whole form of Islamophobic construct, that it might as well they got killed, so they would not report it there to their Arab or Muslim, Christian, Palestinian families, and so on. He's basically again intermixing his Islamophobia in there, and he actually continues with his Islamophobic notion later on. He said, we have to assume that the dozen of cases of rape that were reported, which I found, are not the whole story. They are just the tip of the iceberg. Again, we know that war, ethnic cleansing, especially of this type, that rape is used as an instrument of war. We know this in relations for the development in Bosnia, in the war in Bosnia, where rape was used as an instrument of war. Currently, the Uyghur Muslims in China, where rape as well as the instrumentalization of the status of and use of women as an instrument of putting pressure on the population, but also using all types of sexual violence on them in there. And as such, we could see this in relations to what took place in 1948. He says 24. In some cases, 4 or 5 people were executed. In others, the numbers were 70, 80, 100. There were also a great deal of arbitrary killing. 2 old men are spotted walking in a field. They are shot. A woman is found in an abandoned village. She is shot. There are cases such as the village of Duwaymeh in the Hebron region, in which a column entered the village with all guns blazing and killed anything that moved. Says the worst cases were Salihah, 70 to 80 killed, Deir Yassin, 100 to 110, Lid, 250, Duwaymeh, hundreds, and perhaps Abu Shushe, 70. So again, Benny Morris is describing to us the various massacres that have taken place, and in essence providing the evidence of the number of massacres. I know that all the massacres have not yet been accounted for. There's still research that is undertaken as we speak in order to really find out what transpired after all in relations to the 1948. Benny Morris does not stop there. He actually goes on, and this is what I would like to possibly conclude in relations to this part. He said, in terms Benny Morris, speaking about Ben Gurion, the massacres and the expulsion, he said, quote, Ben Gurion was right. If he had not done what he did, a state, right, a state, meaning the state of Israel, would not have come into being, meaning the ethnic cleansing, the massacre, the order to empty the villages, to destroy the villages, to give carte blanche for the military to undertake whatever instrument of power to drive the Palestinians out. He said that has to be clear. It is impossible to evade it. Without the uprooting of the Palestinians, a Jewish state would not have arisen here. So again, without the uprooting of the Palestinians, a Jewish state would not have arisen here. Right? He said, that is correct. Now he jumps to say the following. Even the great American democracy could not have been created without the annihilation of the Indians. There are cases in which the overall final good justifies harsh and cruel acts that are committed in the course of history. So let me repeat what Benny Morris is saying in here. Even the great American democracy could not have been created without the annihilation of the Indians. There are cases in which the overall final good justify harsh and cruel acts that are committed in the course of history. So not only justifying Palestinian dispossession, expulsion, genocide, and transfer, but he had the gall, the audacity, to also justify, in essence, speak that the overall American project of settler colonialism is actually is for the final good. And I don't know if he has visited around and to see what the final good looks like, but he is justifying the Israel project with making a comparison with the United States. He said if he was already engaged in expulsion, maybe he should have done a complete job. So the problem of Ben-Gurion is not that what he did is wrong, is that he didn't do it completely. He said, I know that this stuns the Arabs and the liberals. So maybe we are Arabs and liberals, or maybe those who basically are looking at human rights or hold any type that the violence, the genocide, the colonialism, all this basically it's the liberals and maybe the Arabs are stunned for hearing this, and the politically correct types. So if you're Arab, if you're liberal, or the politically correct, this might actually get you to be a little bit uneasy. But he says, quote, but my feeling is that this place would be quieter and no less suffering if the matter had been resolved once and for all. So he would have rather to have a complete genocide. He would rather have the whole Palestinians being expelled. Now, let me give you the sense that Benny Morris is thinking on a Monday morning quarterbacking, thinking that if he just Ben-Gurion finished the job then and now, it will be all dandy and it will be a rosy picture in this sense because the ethnic cleansing was complete. He said if Ben-Gurion had carried out a large expulsion and cleansed the whole country, the whole land of Israel as far as the Jordan River, it may be yet turned out that this was his fatal mistake. So Ben-Gurion fatal mistake in Benny Morris's Zionism is that he didn't complete the whole job. If he had carried out a full expulsion rather than a partial one, he would have stabilized the state of Israel for generations. So that's what he's lamenting. If the end of the story turns out to be gloomy one for Jews, it will be because Ben-Gurion did not complete the transfer in 1948. So that's the only problem, is that the Ben-Gurion and the early Zionists did not complete their transfer in 1948 because he left a large and volatile demographic reserve in the West Bank and Gaza and within Israel itself. Meaning there are too many Palestinians, that he should have done a complete expulsion, a complete genocide, then Israel might have saved itself for the future. Again, in here you justify the wrong by saying we didn't go far enough in the wrong that was done. Now, if you could change this language in relation to any other group and to say that this was what should have been done, you would see the result. He said, but I am not a statesman. I do not put myself in his place, but as an historian assert that a mistake was made here. Yes, the non-completion of the transfer was a mistake. Now, Benny Morris goes on. He can't help himself. Again, Zionism can't help itself as a settler colonial project. He says, then he shifts to try to basically create the clash of civilization, and basically goes into his overdrive Islamophobia. He said there is a deep problem in Islam. So if you're listening to about Macron in France is saying, or some of the other Islamophobes, whether it's Daniel Pipes, David Horowitz, Stephen Emerson, Pamela Geller, and the rest, host of them, this is Benny Morris, supposedly a historian. There is a deep problem in Islam. This is a person that just a minute ago justified ethnic cleansing, justified the genocide of native population, justified every element, and he says they didn't go far enough, they didn't complete the job, and this is the problem, right? So genocide is not the problem, but the problem that it was not complete, right? And I don't know where did he get his degree, and if there is an ethical requirement for you to get this degree and become called a historian and be invited to speak in all these different, quote, important places, to stand in there and to say that the killing and the genocide and the murder of the indigenous population in America was overall for the good. And I know in certain quarters here in the US you have people that still support this type of notion, but this is what he's saying. So he jumps into his Islamophobia. There is a deep problem in Islam. It's a world whose values are different, right? Again, different than you, genocide, right? A world in which human life doesn't have the same value, right? I don't know, I want to laugh. I don't know if I want to laugh or want to cry, but in here, he justifies the genocide of native populations in the U.S., in the U.S. and the Americas, right? And then he justifies the massacres of Ben Gurion. He justifies that it did not go far enough. And then he had the gall to actually say that Islam has a problem, a deep problem. A world in which human life doesn't have the same value as it does in the West. Where? West of Mars or west of Zionism, that you already have justified genocide, expulsion, transfer. He said, in which freedom, democracy, openness, and creativity are alien. Well, you know, freedom, you're occupying a population close to 2.5 million in the West Bank and another 2 million in the Gaza Strip, give or take. Palestinians in Israel don't have equal rights. Again, even if you want to compare yourself to America, critique America as it is, and I critique it as much, but there is equal standing, at least. While we have racism, discrimination, and so on, but no one will stand and actually say that blacks are treated, blacks don't, they face racism, discrimination, and so on, but still they appeal to a constitution that theoretically, at least, is presenting. Israel does not have even that. You don't even have a constitution. You have a basic Bill of Rights that actually deny rights to Palestinians in 1948. Almost 70 different laws that are there. And don't get me going on the differentiated treatment between Western Jews versus Eastern Jews versus black Jews and so on that you have within Israel. But again, when you are you already have justified the genocide of native population, right? And then the expulsion and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. This is at least what you call, we could say it's just like you're putting out hot air in there. So freedom, democracy, openness, creativity are alien. A world that makes those who are not part of the camp of Islam fair game. So let me say, those who are not part of Zionism are fair game. Just think about all of the assaults on Gaza. Think about the Mossad assassinations throughout the world. So it seems to be do as I say, not as I do. So you blame Islam, but in essence, let me ask you about your record. Let me ask about Zionism record. Let me ask about Israel record. Since you are at it, pontificating from whichever seat in a academic setting that you are doing. Revenge is also important in here. Oh my God. Revenge is important here. So you're telling me that Israel's actions does not pursue revenge? The highest moral army in the world? Again, you know, this is what you say, and let's check on it. Revenge plays a central part in the Arab tribal culture. Therefore, the people we are fighting and the society that sends them have no moral inhibitions. If it obtains chemical or biological or atomic weapons, it will use them. If it is able, it will also commit genocide. Whoa, 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 whoa. Now, at the end of this, again, I point you out, you could get the whole interview. It's dated, it's appeared in Haaretz, dated January 9th, 2004, and you could either ping me or on Facebook, and I'll be more than happy to give you the whole article. So you're telling me, again, that if they get the chemical or biological or atomic weapons, oh, they're scary, you know, these Arabs, Muslims, and so on. But remind me if I am a little bit slow in here, you know, the only civilization, the only society that have used nuclear weapons, as far as I know, it's a Western country called the United States, and used it against Japan, 2 nuclear devices in there. Even as the war was coming into conclusion. But you're actually blaming that the Arabs and Muslims, the boogeyman, again, this is Islamophobia on what you call on steroid, drawing the threat and the fear of Islam to justify. And then he says, they will also, right, if it is able, it will also commit genocide. You already justified genocide, man. I know that sometimes maintaining logic and continuity is difficult because we no longer teach logic, all right? But you already have accepted that genocide toward native populations for the good man, right? Because they're the wrong people, right? You accepted that Ben Gurion didn't do enough, genocide and expulsion, transfer the Palestinians, right? His problem, he didn't go far enough. But now you're using Islamophobia, pumping a hot air of fear of Islam and Muslims, that if they get nuclear weapons, they will threaten us. But you in Israel are okay of having 600 nuclear warheads, and the person, Venunu, who actually informs about it, ends up in jail, right? Again, this is hypocrisy on steroids that we're talking about. So what I wanted is, again, to get into this little bit about the Deir Yassin Massacre, and to point out it's one of those, it's a large massacre, and I know there has been debate, academic work on the actual numbers. Initially, it was reported at the time of the occurrence as 254 that were massacred. Later on, research reduced the number to possibly 102 or 112. But the impact of Deir Yassin, it actually caused the flight of Palestinians because they were fearful. And as Elia Itzhaki and Yuri Melstein said, that the flight of the Palestinians occurred because they were fearful of the massacres after hearing of the Deir Yassin massacre. And then the Zionist propaganda went overboard to try to actually announce and promote that the massacres are taking place so people will flee. And in this sense, that was the cause of the flight of the Palestinians, this panic, this fear. But setting that aside, Israel after the war began to use propaganda to say that the Arabs or the Palestinians who escaped, they escaped because the Arab leaders called on them to leave, and that the Arab armies would come and throw the Jews to the sea. This is the propaganda that became, and you continue to see it written by what you call Zionists, who continue to reproduce all this Zionist propaganda and narrative, which in essence to absolve Israel of its responsibility of actually expelling. That research has been done. Walid al-Khalidi has been done it. Childers did it in 1964 in the Spectator magazine. There is not a shred of evidence that Arab leaders called on the Palestinians to leave. In essence, what we have is recorded messages from Arab broadcasts telling the Arab to stay put, telling the Palestinians to stay put. They did not have the resources to take care of them and not to leave their towns and cities. But what the Israeli army, Ben Gurion, the Zionists, were already having the plan. They already have directives from Ben Gurion for his army or kitchen cabinet. They have the delete plan. They already have done the mapping of the villages in the late 1930s, and they went systematically to empty the villages, expel the villagers, conduct massacres, demolish the homes, and prevent the Palestinians from returning to their homes and land. So still the fundamental element that we're dealing with in relations to Palestine, one is this fundamental narrative that Palestinians, in essence, are not, their narrative, their story of what happened to them is yet to be accorded the standing in relations to how we approach the subject of Palestine. The second is their right of return, right? The right of the Palestinians to return. And this is the biggest chutzpah when you speak about the Zionists who say we're returning back 2,000 years ago, using a historical connections or link in order to come, and then using this what you call illogical logic that we're the only ones that had a state in Palestine. You know, the concept of a nation state is almost 200 plus years in the making. But be it as it may be, the earliest inhabitants of Palestine are the Canaanites. Even when you created or you make a historical link to that state that is mentioned in the biblical text, you were an outsiders to Palestine to begin with, right? So you want to go back to Abraham? Okay, Abraham is not indigenous to Palestine. He came from Mesopotamia. This is the biblical text. This is what it says, right? He migrated. So you could say that the Palestinians gave him a green card to come into Palestine. The Bible said that he spoke the language of the Canaanites, right? So this is, again, your historical record. So how can an occupying external force 2,000 years ago yet make a claim after another 2,000 years ago to come and occupy and say that the indigenous population there is not the actual owners of the land, but we, especially coming out of Europe, in partnership with Great Britain, thank God it's no longer great, right, in relations to Britain, but coming as a settler colonial project adopted by Great Britain. And what we have is the current project. Yet the Palestinians who still know where their home at, they still have their keys to their homes, they still have the lemon trees that they planted, the olive groves, the grapes, all that is there. You have the arguments to put forth that Palestinians don't have the right of return, and you begin to, create lobbying effort here and there to try to persuade those who are slow and dumb-witted to understand what is taking place, and then those who come in with millenarian end-of-time scenarios and thinking that the end of time is coming and Jesus is going to come, so might as well support Zionism and settler colonialism as a stepping stone into the end-of-time scenario. So again, these are the arguments that are being ponied around relative to Palestine and Palestinians, but at the end of the day, the issues that are there still have not changed. The Palestinians have right of return. And maybe for Morris, the fact that Ben Gurion did not finish the job, maybe his conclusion as a historian is not going to turn out nice. I'm sorry to tell you that genocide never turned out to be nice, period. And not because Ben Gurion didn't do the job, because it was wrong. And wrong is wrong because it's wrong, not because it was half wrong. And you should, at least from a person who studies Jewish history, you should accept that as a fact. Wrong is wrong no matter who does it, no matter what rationalization that is being done for it. And you can't say, in order for you to make an omelet, you have to crack eggs. Well, these eggs were human beings. If that's the logic, if you think of human beings as an omelet, then I'm sorry to tell you that you're trying to make a poisonous omelet that is not healthy, nor you could sprinkle it with any type of what you call fair and lovely to make genocide, to make expulsion, to make transfer, to make settler colonialism accepted. It's wrong in the Americas, and we're still trying to deal with the long legacy of what happened in the Americas. It was wrong to commit genocide against the indigenous population in the Americas, which opened the door for almost 200 plus years of enslavement of the Africans, which we which we are still attempting to undo the effects of racism that was built on the genocide of the natives, the importation of commodification of human beings from Africa in order to fill as labor force in the Americas. Right? That is the genocide that you celebrate for an eventual good. It is wrong, and we still need to contend with it, and we are still contending with it today. And what was done by Ben-Gurion and his gang of Zionist gangs that engaged in the massacres, engaged in the rape of women, the thievery of their property, of their wealth, the takeover of their homes, of their orchards and their towns, that is wrong. No time will erase this basic fact. Whether it's an omelet or not omelet, it is wrong at the foundation. And until we begin to understand this, again, for those who every once in a while they want to speak about the victimization lobby, there's no victimization lobby. It's just a matter of recognizing and saying to what is wrong before we could begin to think about the next step to undo and address the wrong that has been done. So on the day of commemoration of Dear Yassin, I would actually still say Palestinians are resilient. Palestinians are still resistant. Palestinians are still remembering the towns, the villages, the alleyways, the homes, the lands they came from. And for those who maybe think otherwise, we are coming back. If it's not today, it's tomorrow. We still have the keys to the houses. We'll open them. And for those who want to be with us to celebrate a correcting of a wrong, we will embrace you as equals. We will embrace you in an expression of both celebration of struggle and resistance toward that which is wrong, whether in Palestine or across the globe. So, free Palestine, it's a state of mind, is not only a statement. So please, if you think this was a useful conversation, a useful presentation, share it. Make sure to join the YouTube channel, and also keep up with these conversations. I'll try as much as possible to illuminate subjects and topics in history as well as in the contemporary period. So thank you for being with me. Assalamu alaikum.